Mistakes. I got a few. But today, we have 15 wildlife photography mistakes. These are ones that we've made, and we have the pictures here to prove it. They're ones that you've probably made, because on the live show, we see them all the time. So let's dig in, Tony. But first...
Who makes this possible?
This episode is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators, and it has more than 13 classes in photo design and more. Anyone can take classes there, anyone can do a project there, and anyone can contribute. So it's a pretty cool community. To get your 2-month free trial, go down into the description. We'll have a link there, and you can just click that. That's the right place to go.
They have lots of awesome photography tutorials. We'll talk about it in a little bit. First mistake I think we see people make is that they just don't get close enough.
Yeah, or they don't have the zoom power, which is frustrating. Here's a picture. It's got clutter. It's not close enough to the action.
Right, there's so much in the picture. It's a great picture, but there's so much in the picture that's not the subject of the picture.
Yeah.
And especially if you're looking at this online, if you're on Instagram, somebody's looking on their mobile phone, it's going to be, the actual subject is going to be teensy tiny. So what can you do? You can crop, right? Mm-hmm. Cropping will often reduce the sharpness of the picture. It's definitely better to get closer and closer and closer. And that, of course, takes time. You have to put the time in. You have to learn the animal's behaviors. And one part of that is the way people take pictures is they grab their camera and they go for a hike.
Yeah.
And then they see a bird and they try to take a picture of it, but that's not a good way to get close.
You got to just camp out for a bit and wait for them to come closer to you most of the time.
Yeah. Check chapter 8 in Stunning Digital Photography, but you're probably just going to hide out.
What's up with that?
Oh, this is a picture of a bald eagle. And I took this, and at the time I was very excited about it, but it's overall an awful picture. And this is tightly cropped,
terrible.
Which is why it's not sharp. Also, we have other things going on that we'll talk about. But if you're looking at your pictures and you're cropping them tight and you're like, why aren't these pictures sharp? It's because you weren't close enough. Even with a bad lens, if you get close enough, it will be sharp. Get closer.
If you have your shutter speed correct and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Motion blur or camera shake, speaking of. Sometimes people will say, oh, my lens just isn't sharp. And the problem is that their shutter speed is too slow. If you're taking pictures of a bird or something that's going very quickly, you'll need a shutter speed of like 1/1500th or 1/2000th of a second. Or you can have camera shake if you have a really long lens, like a 400 millimeter lens, and it's 1/100th of a second. Even if your subject is still, you could probably be shaking.
Depending on factors like how many megapixels you have, whether your sensor or your lens are stabilized. Check chapter 4 in Stunning Digital Photography for detailed information about that.
Pictures. So you can tell that this is motion blur because the whole picture isn't blurry. It's just his head that he was moving. He was head banging, which is a huge problem.
And I got other pictures of the same bird that were sharp.
Yeah.
And the way I solved that was by taking lots of pictures. That's often the best way to solve it because birds in particular will move and then freeze and move and freeze. They're very like little jerky animals.
Little jerkies.
So you could just shoot everything at 1/8000th of a second and you'd be guaranteed to get no motion blur. But if you did that, you'd be using a higher ISO.
And you get more
to
noise.
Make all these other sacrifices. So usually you want to be using the slowest shutter speeds possible and overcome the various amounts of bad shots by just taking more and more shots.
Weird crop. I see this one a lot, and I understand this one because often you're just excited to get a picture of the animal in motion and it's frozen and you use the right shutter speed and you forget about composition. And that's when weird crops happen. Or people crop off the butt or the feet, as I did here as an example, and then it just looks very strange. So make sure you're not clipping any wings off or feet or a crucial part of the picture, and make sure that you're still following some compositional rules so that it's attractive.
Yeah, check the edges of the frame. You don't want the edges of the frame clipping into anything weird.
Unless
want
it's very
an equal amount of
intentional.
space.
I've seen some very closely cropped, and that's different.
And I'll also say, whenever we provide rules like these, people are like,
There's a
oh,
time
but what
to
about
break
this picture? And yeah, there are times you're going to break all these rules. Just make sure you do it deliberately. We're addressing the people who are doing these things unknowingly. So if you are breaking rules deliberately, go for it. There are lots of good examples.
Unless it's ugly, then don't go.
And this is another one where people have examples of where Not having the eyes in the shot, it still turned out to be a great shot. But overall, you want the eyes in the shot, you want them open, and you want the animal looking towards you. And here's just a little side-by-side where it's the same bird. These are consecutive frames, one right after the other. And one, the bird's head, you can see its eye, but its head is tilted just the tiniest bit away. And then when he turned his head just a little bit towards me, it kind of changed everything pretty drastically.
It's a little more interesting. I took this one. Why he got to fly like that? Come towards me.
Yeah, so in the case of an osprey, they will always take off into the wind. So if you know where they're going to be landing, you can position yourself on land while they'll be flying towards you. So some of it is a matter of planning. Some of it's a matter of patience with songbirds. You just keep shooting and wait till they turn their head a little bit.
I was upset about that picture, but the fish was clearly having a worse day, so I got over it.
Silver lining, right?
Yeah. Missed focus. This happens a lot. It's so sad, especially when you don't get a chance to actually get one of the frames in focus. But you just got to move on and try again.
Yeah, if you miss focus, you miss the shot. People still always try to share this because it's like a great moment, but you just missed it.
You missed it.
And it hurts, but you can't share it.
You can share it, but you're going to have someone be like, I think you missed focus.
Yeah, you're back focusing.
Unless you don't share it in the photo community, and then people are like, awesome. Did you take that with your iPhone?
Yeah, they'll still be happy with it. Both of these shots, they just miss focus a little bit. Now, there can be a lot of reasons that you miss focus. Generally, what we want is to use a single autofocus point. So you're deciding where to focus, not the camera choosing from multiple different autofocus points.
That's how I like to live too.
And usually, depending on your camera, but you'll usually want to be using continuous autofocus. That means the camera will vary focus just a little bit because it's so easy for the camera to correctly focus on the back part of the cardinal's head or on the bill. And the camera is locking focus in. It's just focusing on the wrong part of the animal. Continuous focus will give you a little bit of variation. Even if you use single autofocus, you can miss focus because the branches are moving and your body is moving a tiny bit, and you can see the depth of field is so shallow.
Flat, boring light.
Oh, the lighting is so important.
It's very important. This flat light hides all of the details. It's so boring. The osprey blends into the background. Nothing really pops. The colors aren't interesting. Unless maybe this is a vulture and you're looking for this like gray, glum, sad look. Get some good light.
Maybe it's part of the mood, but same type of bird, an osprey with just direct front lighting. And you can see it's just got so much more pop. The colors are brighter. There's more detail there.
It's still not a good photo, but
even though I couldn't get as close, you can see the difference in the light quality. Dang. So you can plan around this a little bit. You can go out when it's a sunny day. You can try to put the sun to your back. So think about where the animals are going to be and try to keep the sun to your back so you have that direct light. And the golden hour still really rules here. When the sun is low in the sky, the lighting is just going to be more flattering.
No mood. Sometimes you get a picture and it's in focus. The composition's pretty good. The lighting's pretty good. Why am I still so boring? It's because you haven't evoked any emotions. This one actually, you chose this one. This isn't terribly moodless, Tony.
But this one, I wanted to choose the same bird, and this one definitely has a more distinct mood, right?
Yeah, it does.
It has soft light, but at the same time, the atmospheric conditions, the bad weather, conveys some sort of mood. Also, the bird has its feathers puffed out, which is kind of consistent with that wintry feel.
Yeah.
So there is overall a mood. You can do some things in post-processing too. You could even desaturate it a little bit. You could, make it a little bit cooler or warmer, depending on the mood that you're trying to convey. So if there is bad weather, get out there because sometimes that can add to the mood. Things like fog, rain can add to the mood.
So true.
What if people want to learn more about photography?
Speaking of being in the mood for learning, you could go to Skillshare and you could check out Elizabeth Weinberg's videos on photography. She talks about color, she talks about mood, she talks about lighting, she even talks about how to make your digital pictures have that film feel. She's a professional, she's very talented, and I liked her video a lot. You can get your 2-month free trial of Skillshare. Go to the description below and just click that link to check it out. That's going to take you to the right place, and then you can just type in Elizabeth Weinberg. You can see her sweet videos.
Skillshare has a lot of great photography tutorials. They're organized, they're led, they have projects you can interact with the actual authors of them.
Yeah.
Check them out. And again, you can get them for free with your trial. Thank you for sponsoring us, Skillshare. We talked earlier about people getting camera shake or motion blur because their shutter speeds are too slow. But I also see the opposite problem. People who use a shutter speed that's too fast.
Too fast.
And so I just left my camera on the wrong settings. You can see up in the corner there, it's a still bird, but I shot it at 1/1000th of a second.
And it's noisy as all heck.
Yeah, because the camera had to be at ISO 3200 to properly expose it. So as a wildlife photographer, you're probably shooting in shutter priority or manual mode, and you're kind of riding that shutter speed dial. If the bird's flying, maybe you need to crank it up to 1/2000th, but if they land, if they're mostly still, you're going to want to lower that shutter speed. And one technique I like to use is to grab some shots at 1,000th, grab some shots at 500th, and then keep getting slower and slower and taking more and more pictures. So
this photo's got a lot going for it, Tony. You got a great mood, a great pose,
great model, right? Cedar
composition,
waxwing, beautiful bird.
but you just didn't change your shutter speed.
Yep, and as a result, it's noisier. It could still be salvaged, but it's got more noise than needed. On the other hand, here's a shot at 1/200th of a second, similar pose, similar light, just about the same amount of light, but I was able to shoot it at ISO 800 instead of ISO 3200, which means everything's going to be a little bit cleaner. Exposure is also a big problem.
Exposure, it's so hard, especially if you have a bright white sky or a snowy ground in the background like this. There can be a lot of contrast in wildlife photography, especially since a lot of animals are black and white. Like, what do I do?
Most cameras have very simple auto exposure systems. They'll just kind of balance the light that they see and try to make it gray. And as a result, if you have a bright background, you end up with a dark subject. So if you have a mirrorless camera, you can kind of see through the viewfinder what your exposure is going to be. Look at that histogram, crank up the exposure compensation so that you are exposing some part of it in the right quarter of the histogram. There's more information in Chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography about histograms. As you can see, I brightened it in post. Shooting raw can also help for those times when you do screw it up. But it would have been better for me to get the right exposure in camera. I know sometimes you're responding, you only have a split second to get a picture. You don't always have time to think through everything. It just takes practice because with time, your hands will start to adjust the auto exposure.
You also, if you're taking wildlife photos, you should be going back to the same spots over and over again, learning that animal behavior. It's a lot of luck involved, but just being there and practicing, even if it's not the subject you were hoping for, you're going to learn a lot that way. Artifacts. I see this on the live show all of the time. You get a picture of your subject, especially if it's a bird. You have a white background and you just really want the sky to be blue. So what do? You go in and you lower the highlights and you lower the blues in the color panel, and you can end up with crazy fringing. You can see all around the leaves and at the edges of the owl. I did it in an exaggerated way to show an example, but it's
exactly like we see all the time.
It's ugly. So if you see those artifacts, you're probably looking at your subject and not really noticing that. But look for them and see if they're there. So here's an example. This is a picture that I took. The sky's gray. You can go to lower it too much and make it too blue, and then you get these white lines around your subject, and the edges of the trees are all white and weird looking. Just back off a little bit, or use a graduated filter, or do it more carefully in Photoshop if you have that skill. But be careful with artifacts.
Yeah, less is more with post-processing.
And uninteresting behavior, aka the borings.
I always feel bad when somebody submits a picture of a bird and it's just like, yes, you got a picture of a bird.
Going through my bad pictures for this episode, I realized I had a lot of boring birds. Here's one. Exhibit A.
Yeah, there's no background that's interesting. The bird is flying.
He's so boring.
It's sharp and good, but he's not doing anything. The lighting is not interesting. The colors are not interesting. It's just a boring picture. It's fine, though.
Oh, look at this. He's diving. There's water splashing everywhere. He's fish
front-lit.
Is cool.
He's doing something,
He's doing something.
These are, again, 2 consecutive pictures. It's a fine picture. Nice kind of atmosphere to it. But
now we're cooking.
Yeah, a split second later, he does his red-winged blackbird call.
What's that sound like?
You tell me, Justin. I don't remember. I've heard it a million times.
Yeah.
Over sharpening is another
Over
big one.
sharpening. I've done it. You've done it. Tone has definitely done it.
You can't add detail in post. Adding a little sharpening in Lightroom or Photoshop can definitely make it seem a little bit better. And I almost always sharpen my wildlife pictures a little, but it can be too much. Like here's the cutest animal in the world, a red panda, but let's zoom in on the over sharpened picture. And these are the artifacts that you see.
Disgusting.
Noise becomes accentuated. You see this sort of fringing around areas of contrast, like this whisker on the left here. You can see it goes from white to black unnaturally.
Yeah, it looks like this animal was made in Microsoft Paint. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And here's that same close-up, but with a more reasonable amount of sharpening. And you can see this does look sharper, but it also looks crappier. And without the over sharpening, it looks much better. One of the biggest mistakes that I see.
I recommend using a high pass filter in Photoshop. And if you don't know how to do that, I think I probably taught you in a free YouTube video, but we also have a Photoshop book. So check that out. Underexposed eye. This is the creepiest mistake you can make because look at this dead-eyed bird. Look at it. Don't do that. He looks so spooky. You can go in, you can raise the exposure, you can use a brush and go in and just raise the eye a little bit.
Yeah, I'll often hit the adjustment brush, drop it right on the eye, just size it a little bit bigger than the eye with a soft edge, drop it on there, and then raise the exposure by like half a stop. Just a little bit.
Just make it pop. Then suddenly, this creature has an eyeball, and it's just way better that way.
Yep, the eyes are so important.
Bad background. This is a sad, sad story. It's when finally the animal you want comes along, but he flies in front of the ugliest thing in the world. Look at this heron. It wouldn't have been a good shot anyway, but it's a good example picture. But you can't even see it.
There's so much clutter in the background that, and also the subject is the same color tones, the same luminosity.
I know.
And so it just disappears into the background.
His natural camouflage was to fit in amongst houses.
Yeah. Another example of just too much going on. It's classic when you're in a forest or something because there's so much clutter. You could improve this by blurring the background a little bit more, maybe getting a faster lens, but more than likely you're just going to need to find a different spot, someplace where the background isn't as close to the bird. For example, this picture was taken in the wild, but he just happened to land on, well, a freshly trimmed branch that just had green leaves in the background. And the leaves were far enough back that they all became blurred and it became this kind of perfect green background.
I like this one.
Same thing, taken in a natural habitat. He's in a field of yellow. In this case, I bent my knees. You bend your knees up or down and that lets you change the background. So if I'd bent down a little lower, you would have seen the horizon with clutter and buildings and stuff. If I were a little higher, the background behind it would have been closer. Therefore, it wouldn't have been as nicely blurred. So think about your background, move yourself around, try to keep the sun to your back, but pick your spots and find a place where the background will be nice and clean.
Feeders and fences.
Oh, so common. Because that's where birds are, right?
That's where the birds are, and I get it. You got to get that picture, but it's not that attractive. This one's actually not that bad. I kind of liked something about it, but still a natural environment's nicer.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot. People go to the zoo and they want to get a picture and they have fences in it. And that's not so wrong. I put an edited version of this picture. Let me see, is it in there? Oh, yeah. You can just blur out the background and it looks a little more natural. But ideally, you just want your animal in a more natural environment. This is natural.
Yep. So rather than taking a picture of your bird at the bird feeder, they'll hit the bird feeder, grab some seed, and usually fly off to a nearby tree. Wait for them in those nearby trees, or even plant some trees or branches or some little place for them to land, but don't take pictures of them at the bird feeder. And if you're in the zoo, often you can move yourself a little bit to one side or the other and pick a spot where either the background is far enough away that it becomes blurred or the chaining isn't obvious once you have that little bit of background blur. And then like Chelsea demonstrated, there's the option of doing a little bit of post.
A little bit of post.
Thank you to our sponsor, Skillshare, which has a ton of videos covering photography and other topics, and you can just try it out for free.
Yeah, just go into the description down below, click the link, and you can get 2 months free. Thanks so much.
Yep, subscribe for more free videos. Give us a like if this was helpful. And if you have other tips, write a comment down below. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.